So welcome everybody to Field Force Book Club, and this is the second time we're meeting, and this month we're looking at The 4-Hour Work Week by Timothy Ferriss. So I don't know if people have managed to read it, if they've already read it, if they're halfway through, if they're going to stop reading it because they're getting bored, which is actually one of his recommendations to do. And I thought it might be nice to kind of run this session in the style of Timothy Ferriss, because I've got a little gavel here. He's from reading the book, he doesn't seem to like to have any meetings whatsoever. So it's a bit of a perhaps contradiction that we're meeting to discuss his book. He seems from the book written in 2007. I'm reading the 2009 updated edition. You know, he seemed very against meetings because they're a waste of time. And he talks about one manager saying, I'm not here to make friends. I'm not here for chit chat. I'm here to get the sales team selling. So I am here to chit chat. I'm happy to make friends, and I'm interested in chewing the cud with this book with you to see what you made of it. So, in Timothy Ferriss style, I'll give an agenda, and we'll start the meeting, and we'll finish exactly at 8:30 if we fancy, but perhaps we won't, and people need to leave anyway, Meta at a certain time, so you feel free to do what you like. Um, but yeah, I thought it'd be interesting what you liked about the book, what you didn't like, what you'll take forward, what you won't take forward in things you're doing and not doing, and also what you think about the relevance of this book right now for the time we're in. So this book, to give you a little bit of background, was written in 2007. Timothy Ferriss submitted it 26 times and failed to get it published. And it was the 27th time that he got it published. And I just set somebody in. It's the 27th time it got published. As we know from last month, the goddess of fortune, the goddess of good luck, favors action. So I really liked how action orientated Timothy Ferriss is in this work, and the kind of things he suggests doing, not really for what they do, particularly like getting VAs to do a whole load of things, but for the skill set it develops in us. And he seems to me to be a real master about acquiring skill, how quickly we can acquire skills and techniques for doing that. And so this was the first of the books that he wrote. It became a New York Times bestseller very quickly, even though a lot of people said there's no way it would even get published. And the other books he went on to write are also intriguing. For instance, there's The 4-Hour Body, with the subtitle An Uncommon Guide to Rapid Fat Loss, Incredible Sex, and Becoming Superhuman. And he has a whole section on how to create sexy titles and test them out that sells. And intriguingly, he then spent a lot of his time explaining that the 4-hour work week is not actually about working for 4 hours a week. It's symbolic, really, for using time and in a particular way. And he seemed to go on. I mean, we've got things like he went on to write things like the 4-Hour Chef, which, as well as about cooking, is about how you learn an accelerated pace. And I think that's something that intrigues me about what he expresses in this 4-hour work week. So he's a Cancerian, July the 20th, his birthday, and has moved away a bit from this 4-hour work week, focus on productivity. So even though there's talk about a lot of the, what gets measured, gets valued and changed, I think in more recent years he's moved away from that and still does a podcast. I'd certainly like to explore his work after having read this, but I'm very interested in what your impressions are and what you think. So, what did you make of it? Or what would you like to read about it if you haven't started on it yet?
Should I go? Mine might be
Go.
the short version because I started it, but then I kind of got distracted by going into too much of the detail. So I went to find the blog on his morning routine just to see what he did that was different from me. And his morning routine was about 90 minutes, and I just thought, holy shit, I'm not sure that I've got that 90 minutes to like give up for 60 to 90. So there were some things in that I didn't gel with, especially like the thing of putting butter in your coffee, which is um, was one of those things that came up as a fitness fad, which is actually a load of rubbish and doesn't do anything at all. And why would you put butter in coffee anyway? I mean, put it on toast and have a cup of coffee, you know. But so I really didn't get past his into his like what his 4 hour work week was, and but I did find it a little bit. I kind of found it exciting and hard going at the same time.
I, I know exactly what you mean. I found myself being very challenged by this book. I liked that I was very challenged by it. Some bits I found irritating, some bits I found very funny. There's a lot I feel I'll take from it. I also found I didn't finish it, and he says, develop the habit of not finishing that which is boring or unproductive. And I think partly because of the time it was written, 2007 or 2009. I think he's a visionary, and I think when he wrote this, he's particularly ahead of time. And what he's discussing would at that time have been much less common than it is now. So I think he's got an ability to see through time, not just about time management, but to see concepts and to see how we can work and live ahead of a lot of people, and very, I think, important to a whole range of generations, and particularly kind of more recent generations, much more in tune with that very naturally. Um, but I found it interesting, the bits that I found that would be challenging to do. I mean, or what would be the point of doing that? I mean, one part is when he's talking about automation, he's talking about getting VAs, to apologize to your partner if you've messed up, and the humor, of just what they'd be saying in an apology. And it made me think, how can we apply some of these techniques or some of these principles to now how we can use AI, how we might want to apply some of those things. And I also thought, some of the material is so detailed, like you say, Alison, it's so detailed. I found, well, some of this is probably, a lot of those links don't even exist. Those software programs don't exist. But at the time he wrote them, they would have been, people wouldn't have gathered that information. So I lost a bit of interest with those kind of things.
I mean, I agree with you. I started reading it, and then I stopped. But because I felt that it was a very, if I was in a different place in my life, I think I would have, I needed you actually need to work through it, I think, in many ways for it to make sense for you, because of, as you say, some of it is dated, some of it simply won't apply to, in this case, my circumstances. And I found it quite managey, like management speak, in the very in a sort of very particular vein. But I thought that the concept of what he was saying was really interesting, and and very practically relevant. If you really wanted to sort of tear up the rule book and do things differently, I think it would be really useful to sit down and work through it. I just don't want to tear up the rule book and go off and live in a van somewhere. But I thought it was really interesting. So it's one of those books that I'll put on my shelf, and then one day, if I really want to do something radically different, I think that he is someone that I would definitely go to. And I think his whole point about not following the mainstream and doing, really looking very carefully at what is important to you, and this idea about how we stop ourselves from doing things because we automatically think, oh, that's going to be too difficult, that's going to be too expensive. I loved how he sort of said, no, actually sit down and you just think about it, and actually when you break it down, these things are achievable. They're often more achievable than you think. And I think I love that, because I think I certainly recognize in myself that I'll say, oh, I'd love to do that, but that's never going to happen because XYZ. Actually, no, break it down week by week and you'll see it's £2.50, you know, over 10 years or whatever. But, you know, I thought that was interesting out of the book.
I agree. I think it's fascinating, things like that, and I think there's still so much that's very ahead of time and relevant. And in that same vein, you know, he talks about the role of just being outrageous in what you want to go for. You know, in terms of goals that you have. And how it's so much easier to achieve something completely outrageous than something very mediocre. And that really appealed to me, you know, the kind of instruction really to be extreme
Yeah.
in your visions and what you think is available to you. And actually, if
Yeah.
you have the guts to pursue that, then you're actually much more likely to be very successful at doing that. I mean, one of the things he was saying in it is he works with, or he has worked with students, and he used to set them an assignment of communicating with the most hard to reach people possible, and those that did would have a around the world ticket paid for him. And one cohort so undervalued their own capacity that not even one person
Yeah.
attempted it,
Yeah.
which said a lot, didn't it, about sort of perceived obstacles. I mean,
Yes.
in the tarot, there's a great card for it, the Eight of Swords, you know, not being able to see that what the perceived obstacles are not actually true. But the point is we're blind and we can't
Yeah.
see actually what they are. So I think there's a real gutsiness in his
Yeah.
writing, and I'm sure it probably runs through his life and his other works. I mean, some of the things he's achieved, you know, um, if I remember correctly, you know, he kind of absorbed Japanese and lived in Japan, and you know, acquires languages very quickly, and he looked at the rules, I think, of Olympic boxing or wrestling or something, and kind of bent the rules. You know, he kind of bends time, he bends structures to suit his will. And there's something for me very much of the magician in him. He can make things disappear, he can coordinate things to form exactly what he wants, and I really admire that in him.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, but also he was the what was it, the world champion of Latin dancing, or I mean something where, you know, I mean, clearly you don't win that from warping anything. I mean, you have to work very hard, you know, to practice that. But I also noticed that one of the things he said he had done, amongst all these very many different things, he'd also won the title as the most self-promoting person, something, and you know, he was a bit like that. But you know, but I think that's the flip side of this thing about, you know, just having the confidence to say, well, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to put it out there. My friend says that, you know, you have to speak out what you want, and the universe will give it to you. Even if you think that it's, you know, unlikely to happen, you speak it out and it comes back. And I think that's what he's done. He set up, you know, sets these outrageous goals, and then they just, you know, they happen partly because of his hard work, which is not included in the 4 hours a week. But, you know, and part of it is luck.
But we also know from last month's book club that luck, the goddess of good luck, favors action. And
Yeah.
I think with Timothy Ferriss, you know, I'm not suggesting he's lazy at all, but I think he's very smart in how he
Yeah.
understands what actually the reality is. I
Yeah.
mean, he says in
Yeah.
one part, "I don't get reality. I don't understand it." So he kind of warps time, the sense of think this is all just a nonsense, you know, this
Yeah.
idea of how it should be, and we can just kind of do a shortcut through
Yeah.
this way. So I mean, one of the ways he won his kind of championship kickboxing or something was because he looked at what the rules actually were, and he was a visionary and a leader in kind of you know, winning on technicalities that nobody else had kind of clocked on. That's a way to win it. And then he set a whole precedent, and this is, you know, how you can win this kind of competition. So I just think that I think there's something so playful in his
Yeah.
work, and I enjoy that incredibly.
I think that's quite special. I remember him saying about that, about how that's how he won, was to find the little nick in the armor that nobody else was using
Yeah.
and exploit it. And I thought that's really you know people like that. You know, you've got friends who are just like, they just bend everything to their way, and it's not wrong, and it's kind of not right either at the same time. It's perceived right. And the ability to I don't know, like to change shape in that, to make it yours. Yeah, it's a great talent. Really great talent.
He's a shapeshifter, isn't he?
Mm.
And if you think, you know, 2007, 2009, all of what he says now is very relatable, particularly in a COVID world. You know, working from home, all those shifts that the whole world has gone through COVID, and he was there 2007, just pushing that as a norm then, and has got all the navigation of it, very skillful navigation. Like I said, he wasn't a millionaire doing it. He was, like you say, Meta, he was just saying, well, actually, if I want to go and live in Paris for a month, that's actually cheaper than staying in, I don't know, Virginia or something, you know, wherever he was. You know, it's just like working the things out, and seeing the reality of exactly what it would be.
Yeah. And then I also think that his whole argument about, you know, you shouldn't be saving up for all the, you know, to retire and have all these dreams of what you want to do, you should do them now. I mean, I think that's absolutely, you know, absolutely right. And he puts that argument, I think, very powerfully.
And I love what he says about corporate work. You know, he's got great things about meetings, just the waste of time that so much stuff is. And I think even now, some of the stuff he says would probably be quite outrageous for people to post on LinkedIn about their own workplaces. I mean, I think there's still that kind of culture and stigma, you know, the kind of trappings that we can have around ourselves to make ourselves feel productive or make ourselves feel like we're doing a lot of work. And I think he's brilliant at kind of being very incisive and cutting through the illusions and the kind of security blankets we put around ourselves with information or habits or where our attention goes. And he just removes that from the table, you know, underneath all the glasses, and they're still there standing, you know, saying we don't need all this kind of fluff around it. You know, we can just go straight to that thing. And that's the kind of concise use of our resources, the concise use of our attention, the concise use of our time. And I think even now, some of the practices he outlines in this book, I think still in businesses or in corporate setting would still be quite challenging, even though they were written almost 20 years ago, you know, in terms of impacting the environment around him. Do you have anything else, Meta? Because I know you've got to go, that you particularly enjoyed or want to discuss about it.
No. As I said, I didn't finish it, so it's going back on the shelf to, you know, one day when I feel, yeah, that I have, you know, that I want to work through it, because I think it's really, I mean, I think it's actually a very practical book, you know, to really sit down and, you know, but I think it requires, in order to get the most out of it, you really need to think quite deeply, I think, about, you know, what's meaningful to me. And as you know, and I think there's a time and a place for it one day.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, keeping in mind some of the other, I mean, you know, keeping, you know, I think that has shifted my thinking about, you know, yes, actually, let me not underestimate what's possible, or, you know, be a bit more ambitious in that. But yeah.
Fantastic. And how about you, Liz and Catherine? How's it? Are you used to this book for a long time? Is it something that you live and
Yeah.
breathe?
Well, interestingly, for me, I thought, as I was rereading it, I thought I'd go and have a look at when I first bought this book, which was 9 years ago and 11 months to the day. So that was, and it was probably at the time a business book that was recommended. So, and what's interesting is that the concepts in this book would have been radical 10 years ago when I first listened to it, because I'm a listener. And I think I can really understand, well, I can relate to you guys saying, well, I either didn't finish it because it was hard going, or so because I was listening to it, it means that I could keep going. And that is for me, one of the huge benefits of listening and reading a book, because when it gets tricky, then the talking book keeps talking, it doesn't tire, and I can just keep on going with it. So what was interesting for me listening to this book again, and I hadn't listened to it since the last listening probably, was how many of the concepts in this book I had taken on board, or we had taken on board. And so everything in my work life has been to create this remote working, remote living, but there were lots of things that I still took away that I thought, oh, so, I mean, I really like how the book is laid out under DEAL. So definition, elimination, automation, and liberation. And in the D for definition, there were a couple of things that really jumped out again. That one was dreamlining, which of course you've already been speaking about, and mapping out your dreams into actionable steps and calculating the cost of those. But also he talks about calculating the cost of not doing these things. And by being stopped by fear, or anyway, I really liked looking at that. And so, in fact, dreamlining as a term seems a lot more exciting than goal setting or, mapping out a new vision. And the other thing that he talks about in this section is eustress versus distress, which
yes.
Yeah, so anyway, I was talking to Catherine about it, and she said, we used to talk about this in our workshops, and it's like, I just didn't remember hearing the word eustress. And so, and then when he goes on to the next section about elimination and the 80-20 Pareto principle, there's lots of things in this, concepts within this book that are no longer foreign to me, and I've heard them in lots of other business books or personal development books. So, but just really acknowledging that actually sometimes having some tension creates more, and being able to use that as leverage rather than as a barrier. And so I found that a very good reminder. In the elimination section, obviously he talks about the 80-20 Pareto principle. He also talks about batching and, batching similar tasks together. And of course, over the years, we've heard lots of people batch cooking and putting them in the freezer, and food, that is, not bodies. And also batching emails and things. So it was one thing so I was reflecting on the things that we have taken action on in the last 10 years. So looking at income generating activities, and so looking at my zero and going, which activities are the highest generating, and doing more of those. Or if we don't do more of those, then acknowledging that, we're doing a low activity, money generating activity, and we're doing it for fun because it is enjoyable, and we want to have that, we want to include it, but we're doing it in awareness, if that makes sense. But by the same token, quite often now I will do a task and go, it's just not worth it. Or, I've got an experience at the moment with Alibaba themselves, not my suppliers or PayPal or anything, but Alibaba, the organization. And I was reflecting on this the other day, going, $177. Is it worth the energy to go and fight for this money? How much mind real estate am I going to waste rather than actually moving on and generating, creating more on my dreamlining, and actually moving forward on creating those dreams. So I've decided to park it, which for me is really hard. I can go and chase 20 quid, So or even, you know, return something to the supermarket, which is only £3.51. And it's like, actually, what is a good use of my time, my resources, my energy, but also my mental real estate. And so it's my mental real estate that I value now more than almost anything else. And it's like, what is taking up my time? And that means, you know, sometimes I might get up at 4 o'clock in the morning because I've had another dream about not having done my tax return or my VAT return or whatever it is. And it's like, just get up right now. Don't waste any more time, or pick up the phone and make that phone call that you've been avoiding, because the mental real estate that it's taking out is way more of a cost. And so it was really good to look at elimination in that respect. One of the things that we also looked at was that a number of years ago, one of our people within our community wrote us an out of office and said, you guys are too available. And so we never answer. So we'll answer our emails maybe. And well, most likely, I mean, not always, but most likely 95% of the time. But I also don't do it within 24 hours. I'll do it within a week when I'm next there. So my email box does not run my life for sure. And my out of office says that. It's like, we'll get back to you at some time. If it's urgent, ring me on this number. And I never answer phone calls that I don't know who they're from. I always let it go to voicemail. So these are some things that I have adopted, but I hadn't credited Tim. Tim, thanks for telling me this, because it's part of the fabric of how we run our business, and I hadn't realized. Under automation, I've had many iterations of virtual assistants that have had me pulling my hair out or going, oh, I think she's finally got it. So one thing that I really have noticed we've had virtual assistants now looking at this outsourcing for probably at least 8 years, to varying degrees of success. And there was a couple of things that really stood out for me. One, I remember being in New Zealand and must have made some comment to my mother like, oh, so-and-so, this particular virtual assistant that worked for us full-time, has done this again, and it's really a pain. And my mother said to me, you said that last year when you were here. What are you doing about it? So it was really good to go, actually, I need to not work with her anymore, even though it was taking up too much mental real estate. So there were some good things, but also I noticed that I can be a real control freak. So therefore it's easier to go and do the job myself. And so the time and spent training is really, it's essential, obviously, but it also requires you not to give up and to keep sending stuff back if it's not right. And sometimes, well, not sometimes, often it's just, I don't have the time. I actually just need to move on and do the next thing and the next thing. So you've got to have time to train the outsourcer, and then it can be very, very good. Another thing he talks about is having income on autopilot. So I was reflecting on that. And one thing that Catherine put in place, which I fully supported after the event, was of renting out sections of our property to lodgers. And we did that for 5 years. Now, with challenge, but at £24,000 a year extra income that we didn't have to do anything for apart from share our space. 24 grand. I mean, it was really interesting looking at that figures going, well, that was worthwhile, just they were empty rooms that were not being used, apart from the sharing the kitchen at times. But, anyway, so that was useful. And it was really good to go, well, where else could we tap into income or money flows, let's say that, money flows that are previously untapped, and look at how we can make that work for us. And so certainly all of the books and things, or the products that we've created, have been with that view. I mean, in 2015, I started using Zoom and running online things. And so it's been very interesting. Catherine and I had this meeting at the beginning of 2020, way before we knew about COVID. I mean, way before, like 3 months before. But we intentionally were sitting down going, how can we move our audience online? So some of them, they'd come online for some of the things activities we were doing, but not everything. And we wanted to have this geo arbitrage he talks about in the next section of Liberation, where we could work and live anywhere in the world. But our customers were desperate for us to be in person. And so I had just flown back to London at the end of 2019 on my knees, exhausted, to run a course from New Zealand. So I'd flown back from New Zealand to London for a couple of weeks to run a course with Catherine, and then we turned back on the plane and came all the way back again. And I spent so much time in the air in 2019 flying back and forth because of my attention needing to be in New Zealand with a very sick family member, and just back and forth. And it was just so crippling on my body. And so we limped our way to December 2019, arriving back in New Zealand on my knees, exhausted. And I said, we have got to do things differently. And so COVID was such a huge blessing in so many ways. I mean, in some ways it was incredibly challenging because all of our in-person stuff we lost immediately. And so that was a massive hole because we still hadn't managed to pivot, using that 2020 word, our customers. But our customers have been wanting to go back in person, and we don't want to do that. We've pivoted, we're staying so that we can carry on with this remote working, to be able to live and work anywhere in the world and be able to enjoy the benefits of where we're living. Now, at the moment, so if I look at, in that liberation, so I'm using a lot of time here, and I think this book is really good, you see. So it was really good to read it 10 years later and go, well, actually, we have implemented that. We've done that. So over the last year, so selling the property and going, okay, we're all in. Are we doing this? And then going off and exploring. If I look at, I did a little tally over the last few days about how much money we've spent on accommodation in the last year. And it's about £2,500 in total. And that includes power, which we don't have any at the moment and haven't since yesterday. But it includes everything. And apart from our mobile phones, obviously, and our Wi-Fi that we bought, hence why we can communicate with you. But £2,500 in a year, and that includes a month with a beachside villa on a beach for a month in Thailand. I mean, that includes all of that.
You could pay that for a bed sit in Shoreditch, couldn't you?
Exactly. So, I mean, it's so liberating to go, actually, we have done this. But I really love that he goes, suggests, so I'm Meta, saying that, I go and live in South America for 6 months and then really immerse myself in the language. And in the liberation, he talks about these mini retirements. And I thought, so when he has, at the end of every chapter, he talks about Q&As, questions and actions. And so I thought that was fantastic. I don't remember hearing that before. And I thought, actually these, what actions am I taking from each of these chapters? And it could be just one thing, which could be just a different mental thought, but it could actually be a physical, I'm just going to do that different. I'm going to put my out of office on or whatever else, And so the life simplification and the decluttering, and I've lost that power now as well, dear. Anyway, here I am. Hello. We're by one candle now. That torch has done its last day. Oh, here it is. Thank you, Catherine. Trying to read my notes. And the sun will come up in about an hour. We'll be okay.
I so love that you've joined in from New Zealand, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. We are
wonderful.
This week.
This week, exactly. You're
you.
just living this book. You are living this book, both of you.
We are, actually.
I think it's lovely to kind of put it back to Timothy Ferriss as the originator. The kind of unconscious originator. I think he's got this ability just to kind of seep into our thinking effortlessly. Yes, there are these actions. Yes, there is the kind of corporate stuff has adopted this approach, but he's come up with it all this time ago, and it's had this kind of legacy. It's so lovely to hear, Liz, just how much you've really integrated this. And I also feel in what you're saying, there's so much more that you still want to integrate and will. I mean, I've got notes all over it of things I want to take forward from it.
Mm.
And also, say with in a way, through COVID, the world has kind of been forced to kind of read and live this book, hasn't it, or have the challenge of it, and the world is ready to catch up with all of this. I mean, at the time you're talking about, just after your flights, I at the start of COVID, I was working at Visa, and I was involved in the pivot to take everything from face to global. Obviously, for a global corporation, it was a big deal. I mean, I actually developed arthritis in my hands doing it all so intensely, but it's such an interesting shift. And I think also, like, you don't want to go back to that face to face in the way that you were. And I also think for future proofing, I mean, we're not beyond pandemics. I mean, there's a lot of people saying there's going to be more pandemics. So I think for the future of business, there's a lot that's been initiated from this. I think too, I don't know what other people thought, but I think what he says about business and how to be an entrepreneur is there's a lot in that it could almost have its own section, about the sort of thinking, about the testing of ideas, about having a market for what you're doing, about niching. I think he's talking about niching before it was trendy, and talking about the specificity of niche and going deep. And I think he's got great resources, with his journalistic background. I know he talks about print, but there's still a lot of that online that's entirely relevant about how to really niche down, but get ideas for different things by looking at publications. Just loved a lot of that.
Yeah, I certainly thought that the business, doing your muse was really good, and really encouraging you to create it as a side hustle first while you're in your day job, rather than just going, well, to heck with everything, I'm just going to go and do this and do the hopes and dreams marketing, but actually really testing and following the process through. Yeah, it's still incredibly relevant today.
I mean, he's got the moral is that intuition and experience are poor predictors of which products and businesses will be profitable. I mean, he really outlines not just the muse, but testing the muse. And do you think, this was in a time before AI, before, a lot of niche kind of developmental work? It's really, really on the edge of things. And I'd love to sort of know where he's at now in terms of, he seems to do research into consciousness and ways of learning. And I think there's probably, from what I've looked at, there's less emphasis on measurement and productivity, but it's a lot also on this enjoyment of life, which all of this is for. Why we're doing all of this. I think he just strips away all the kind of bullshit we might tell ourselves about our practices that we've been doing that we think are for business, or for how we fool ourselves, that we're being productive. I think he's a master at just playfully prodding that, and just letting this sort of unsubstantiated pack of cards just fall effortlessly and invite us, like you say, Liz, to the muses, to the lifestyles, to, like Meta was saying, living now, the importance of life now.
Yeah, and having these mini retirements right now. So certainly one of my takeaways was to go, well, where can I, so my focus over the last year is balance. So having, not working all of the time, like we had been doing, during COVID, because we were just, had so much to crack on with. But also when I was reflecting, I was thinking, well, I was either relaxing or I was working. And relaxing was probably more like collapsing rather than actually relaxing. And so now it's like, actually, what activities can I incorporate just for fun, just because for the sheer joy of it? And so really, when he was saying, well, I fancied, doing that world championship for Taekwondo or whatever it was. And or learning a language, or learning how to cook, or all of these things that he talks about. And I think that actually that is going to be my main takeaway from this reading this time, is actually, where can I have these mini retirements? Don't wait until, I'm 65 or whatever the retirement age is, but actually just to incorporate all of these things and make it every aspect of activity as fun as possible. However that fun's showing up. And it could be just connecting on a book club at crazy o'clock in the morning, just because it's fun to hang out with other people that I am knowing, liking, and trusting, and wanting to tap into their wisdom, and actually having that. If it wasn't for this, then I wouldn't have read this book again, And so I'm excited what next month's book's going to be, because I'm going to be doing that. And even if it's hard going.
He talks about excitement as well. Excitement being what we get up for, what can guide us. It's and I think this is where the mix of excitement, this playful quality, and also saying, the world that looks, oh, it's fixed like that, he just goes, hey, it's not, this is what spiritual teachers do. They say, hey, you can put your hand through that, there's not actually a solid wall or whatever. I mean, he quotes Bruce Lee in parts of it, but I think particularly around time, I mean, I just get so amused by so much that we hear in business speak about time, and so many people are still not understanding time. They're still trying to measure it, grasp it. There's a lot I'm going to be doing probably about time, because I have a particular view on it, but I think that's a huge area where it's still very befuddled and barbaric, really. A lot of our collective understanding about time. I think there's a lot more movement we can have around time, and he's there just being so playful. And I think this spirit of playfulness is really what takes us to that excitement and edge, because somehow everything is just not quite so serious. I mean, I don't know if you ever looked at the stuff he said about sending things to spouses. I mean, would you send Catherine everything, an apology via a VA? I mean, some of it just made me laugh my head off, the sort of ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't think I would. No.
I mean, how productive would that be? Exactly.
Well, yeah, Catherine said no if she wants to stay married. Absolutely. And but there are a lot of things that you can outsource. And then there are some things actually you can outsource up to a point. So, do some research. So our current VA, actually, we've just moved from doing a fixed number of hours a month. And then on the 1st of May, she's now gone full time, because we've actually changing what we're going to be giving her. And she really not cheap. And so we're really having to dig deep and raising our game of what we're giving her. And we get her to do a lot of research and say, bring us that information. And then, just like he was saying, actually, and then you actually then go but you haven't done all of that groundwork. So get them to do the groundwork. But I certainly won't be getting her to go and do,
buy roses, Catherine.
Exactly, no.
I thought it was great the way he was saying about, again, the use of time. If depending on where your VA might be based, and obviously it can be geographically anywhere, your results, or they can have done it while you're sleeping, so that then you start when you want to start, and you've got all this kind of capacity ahead of time. Something else you were talking about, I was going to say, I've forgotten now. Come back.
But even that note of him saying working in different time zones from from most of your customers, or he was talking about the other business that you're working in, and there really are big advantages, actually, because so for instance, very few people actually know, with North America, they're a few hours behind us but ahead of us, if you know what I mean, time wise. So but certainly our whole afternoon will be empty, because America and UK, which are our two predominant customer markets, are asleep. And so we're going to just we can do anything we like in the afternoon, because we know that there will be very little interaction will be required. But it does mean that we have early mornings and we have late nights with Zoom meetings or whatever else, and that's okay, because we've got all day to sleep or to play or whatever else. So there are some big advantages, actually. And I really love, actually, certainly with the UK, is that we sleep all night, and then I don't talk to anybody after I've gone to bed, and nothing. The world doesn't stop turning. There are very, very few emergencies. In fact, there have been no emergencies for us, and
I
so it's
think
like,
I think it's fantastic how he describes that, and it's kind of feels very bold, very clear, um, very protective in a non-defensive way, of his
mm,
own passion, his own value of his own life. And I think, given that this was written in the time before bots, you think how much with automation is normal now in business. He was doing this
yeah,
at that time, saying, well, actually, I don't need to sit on how much, like you're saying, like people have said, the quantification of not just in real estate of your mind, but actually in the hours you could spend sorting out like a $40 problem for somebody who's a pain in the ass customer versus,
mm,
the high proportion of time you could spend on perhaps, 10% of the customer base that's actually, giving you profit in your business. I mean, that's part of the Parkinson's law that he talks about, isn't it? And I think his ability to support himself and be absolutely ruthless in supporting what he needs, and his clarity of understanding of what is a complete waste of resource and effort and time, I think is superb and incredible leadership. And I think there's a lot to take from that, the layers
mm,
that can go through now.
mm,
I kind of wish I'd read a bit more.
Well, it's not going anywhere, this book. I mean, we can keep rereading it. I'm interested I haven't got to the liberation part yet. I feel I can really see, given that we're doing this from inspiration from Anne Wilson, enjoying in the book so far, seeing her work in the context of the legacy from these things. Like I can see,
mm,
like I would like to apply the not being available to automation, to notifications. I think that's an area that would be great for me to explore and look at the impact of my attention by not having, Instagram pinging and all of this, and the dopamine hits from that. And you can just see how I can hear all of the wealth chef work in this book. I can hear the wealth chef work and Wilson's work in The Richest Man in Babylon. It just kind of seamlessly is in it all, and because of that, it makes it feel, it's just so nice to kind of see these kind of seams and where they've come from, but also to deepen into certain aspects of it. The people we can go to really sit into that even more.
mm. Seeing the implementation in real life
Mm.
Yeah, and also
with
seeing,
real people that we really know, rather than
yeah,
just case studies in a book.
exactly, and the contemporary, how it sits, how the origins of Timothy Ferriss's principles, how they affect us in sort of investment developments, or how we're going to use our time with that, or asset creation. How do the principles from his work in what we're applying from Anne Wilson's approach to life and wealth, how those kind of mesh together. I find that quite fascinating and really want to deepen.
As you were talking before, as Liz was sharing, it sounded to me, having not read it, that he's like, get away from what everybody else is doing, find your shape path, and keep playing and keep making it interesting and keep being different, but knowing what you want your outcome to be. And I found it, and the same, like where and Anne's group doing the same thing of like everyone else is like doing their TV dinner ones or putting in savings accounts, and we've chosen to like do this, whatever we've got, our way, following some guidance of somebody who says have these boundaries but keep safe. You can see him inspiring Anne in that way. Yeah,
Yeah,
completely.
and also in us being our unique, quirky way that it is to us is actually going to be unique way of doing that. And then if we're doing that with his, just go for the most, I mean, he's not doing it because I get very bored with this sort of bungee jump approach to life, you know, that you've got to have the biggest thrill kind of, you know, I think this is a thing of bored people who, you know, whose adrenal systems are just have to be constantly bombarded. I think what I like about Timothy Ferriss's work is there's a kind of quietness within this. There's a kind of everything is switched off, pushed back, so you can just hear what wants to emerge. So you can consider what ways you might fancy yourself of navigating this terrain in the shape shifting form that's actually unique to you. And in that, we become leaders to everybody else because nobody else will be doing what we do with the interest that we have and doing it in the way that we have. And people like Timothy Ferriss, you know, with all his magician's toolkit, you know, can show us, have you tried applying it to time? Have you looked at applying it to what your attention's on? Have you looked at applying it to this kind of thing that you'd never thought of before? And I love that.
Of my perspective, a different kind of perspective. Yeah.
And I also really love, you know, as you said, Sarah, it's about his really gentle approach, and it is a unique journey for you. And so he's not making everybody else in the world wrong for choosing going to a 9-to-5 job if that works for you. But he's really encouraging you to live your best life and how that may be, and to an invitation to go, well, maybe it's not the 9-to-5 living in this same place. And there's allowance for that if that's what you choose. So he's not saying everybody needs to go and, you know, work and live remotely. He's just saying, actually, have you considered this as a different option? And even if you're at home, or at home, whatever home is, but doing what you've always done, then actually how can you make that the best life and not be so available and still have your out of office on and not answering, not driving your own bus? I mean, Catherine and I talk about this all the time. It's like, who's driving the bus? Is it somebody else's agenda or is it our own? So if we're driving the bus, then who are we going to let on the bus, or which stops are we going to take? Because usually people are trying to wave at us to stop the bus. And we're like, actually, I'm not on that route today. I'm on a different bus route. You need to be on this one if you want to catch me, you know. And I'd just like to say, sorry, no, you go.
It's also Anne Wilson's work of being at cause, isn't it? You know, and this is how it links with the liberation in his chapter on liberation and our agency, the agency that we have, you know, to make these choices and to create this direction, you know, with where you want your bus to go, your business to go, your home to go, or also I think even within the kind of it creates the corporate environment as the circus of the corporate environment, you know, people putting their coats on chairs to say they're here this time or whatever, you know. I think there's so much that just cuts that could be applied to contemporary corporate life that is hilarious, that he just calls out, you know, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, he just called it out, and it's still relevant what he's called out. And he says the opposite of happiness is boredom.
Yeah.
How many people are so bored in their jobs, bored of what they're doing, unfulfilled, not being themselves, living this kind of nonsense kind of way because they don't know what else, how to do that bending that he shows us.
Yeah. I also just really like to acknowledge you, Sarah, for having a gavel.
Oh,
I don't know anybody who's got one of those, and I love that you happen to have one. That's superb.
well, we it's a funny story. So in our family, we used to have family meetings about just getting stuff done, and it was my mum actually who had this. We would joke that she was having a gavel, so we just bought her one, and then when we would use it. So yeah, it's been quite
That's
effective.
superb.
But if we're in Timothy Ferriss style, we would say I would actually end of meeting, because we'd said it would be an hour. It is an hour. I'm happy to chit chat more if you like, but also reflecting the nature of what we're talking about. I do feel the whole quality of this book, and what we're left with compared to the quality of The Richest Man in Babylon, I feel like people have said, I want to go and do stuff. I want to think I'm going to apply this, this, and this, or come back to this. Like Betty says, leave it on a shelf for a few years when she knows it's there and she dip into it. Whereas with The Richest Man in Babylon, it felt like, oh, I could just kind of sink in and out of that like a nice tale that kind of seeps its way through. It's a very different kind of time that it's from in terms of what it's evoking in us. To me, Timothy Ferriss is a futurist. You know, he's really talking to something ahead of us even now, taking us there, taking us individually to that point in ourselves to see things ahead of time, and it's come from that. Whereas I feel The Richest Man in Babylon, it was evoking something a more ancient kind of wisdom, and how we kind of then can bring both of those together. Next month I'm going to sneak in an additional book to Anne's list. And what will that additional book be? It's going to be The Wealth Chef by Anne Wilson.
Oh.
Going to do The Wealth Chef. And the reason for that is because, for one thing, it's such an amazing book, but also Anne recommends reading it once a year. She recommends to all of us wealth builders to read it once a year again. So I'm going to propose that we look at The Wealth Chef together again. And it's also the anniversary of me joining FFU in that time, so I thought it'd be nice to enjoy Anne and her work and look at collectively how we might want to revisit it, and particularly perhaps in the context of the Timothy Ferris's, of the George Classon's, you know, how it kind of fits in as the third section of what we're collectively enjoying.
Yeah, I think that's a really good shout. I think that'd be good. Actually, on that note, at the end of Tim's book, Tim, you know, been friends at the end
Well,
of
he
Tim's
calls
book.
himself Tim in sometimes and Timothy others, and I just wonder, is it a different kind of feel when he's
Mr. Ferriss, at the end of Mr. Ferriss's first book, he does have a reading list, and it was interesting to look at that and go, oh, I've got that one on Audible. Oh, I've got that one as well. And I've got that one. It's like, oh, I might listen. And there was one which was, Think Big, Schwartz. What's his name? Anyway, sorry, I'm having a mental blank. And that was the first one he mentioned. And he said, if nothing else, I always just read the first two chapters again and again. And I thought, I'm going to go and listen to those first two chapters, because I do have that book on Audible, probably from a decade ago. And that might be good for my dreamlining as well.
And also the dreamlining seems very Antipodean, particularly, you know, like the sort of song lines and dreaming things into existence. It feels very beautifully connected with place somehow.
Yeah.
I was going to say, he doesn't have a recommended reading list. He has a restricted reading.
Oh, he does, doesn't he? Yeah.
Restricted reading, the few that matter. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, on that note, when he talks about elimination, sorry, there was just another thing which I have actively done. You know, like I really love learning. I don't apologize that I'm an avid learner and I love learning stuff for no reason. But actually, as a direct result of reading this book 10 years ago, there were a number of things I would go, oh, I will need that in my business. I better go and learn how to, I don't know, create a Photoshop image or whatever it was. And it wasn't pertinent to what I was doing right then and there. And so I would always be learning just in case, or I'm going to need that sometime in the future. But the reality is, in the future, you're going to need to go and learn it again because you won't remember it. So that's one thing. I will do it in awareness. Oh, I'm learning this just because I'd like to have a good overview of it, or I'm learning this because I need to actually apply it right now. And if it's a detailed task, like import tariffs was what I've been looking at in the last 2 days. Oh, exciting stuff. But it's been on my mind for years. I need to go and do that. It's like, well, actually, I need to do it now because I've got things arriving in the country this month. I need to know now. So there's an impetus to learn now, and I am retaining the information because there's a need to retain it.
But also that's so Mr. Ferriss, isn't it? You know, having this truncated period of time, and by squeezing it into that, you're really going to do it. You know, I mean, I don't think it works for me.
Do it and apply it.
pack, you know, 3 a.m. for the trip that's happening at 7. That's not always the best way, but I know in me, I will kind of scrunch things in, and then you've got this intensity of motivation and activity to get something out of you. I also think, you know, I really would, I will finish reading this, even if it's speed reading, which he's taught us how to do, which I adore. And thank you, Mr. Ferriss, for doing that. I really want to particularly look at the 4-Hour Chef, partly because I'm absolutely crap at cooking. And I've recognized for years it's a skill it would be great for me to master. And I think it'd be fun to master. But that, I think, particularly is, he says in some of his other work that was a demonstration of how to learn anything. So that's kind of under the subtitles of that book. But with his work, I mean, I found it in this, I think, particularly in that 4-Hour Chef book, it makes me think of The Matrix, you know, the film The Matrix, when one of the characters needs to learn how to ride a motorbike. So she just kind of plugs something in part of her brain, and she's downloaded, right, you know, within seconds now, she can ride a motorbike that she's never been able to do before that second. And that to me is Tim Ferriss. He's that bit, you know, in The Matrix where you just put it in and then you know it. And from what we look at now, people, particularly in work and things, the ability to survive in this climate and time that we're in is measured by our ability to learn and relearn and adopt skills. So I think there's so much very relevant in terms of him sharpening us to what is our accelerated learning capacity. Catherine's put in the chat there, Quantum Jumping, Bert Goldman. Is that the book that you were talking about, to reread the first 2 chapters, or is that
No,
that sounds like a very interesting.
That's another one.
that's another one.
Ooh.
I will look at Schwartz's book. 1 second while I will get that.
Something about magic, isn't it?
Have you read that, Alison? Have you read that?
No, The Magic of Thinking Big.
That's it.
Okay.
No, it's the first one in the back of 4-Hour
The
Week.
back of the book.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, hello. Quantum jumping is simply a process in which you can do that plug-in that you just described.
Fantastic.
So you go to different universal yous in different times and space, and the you that was an artist, the you that was a photographer, the you that was corporate CEO, and tune in to their wisdom and then bring it back to your reality.
So it's like a vibrational frequency, just tuning into it and then becoming that.
So there's a a creative visualization way in which you can access. Yeah. So Bert Goldman
Wow, sounds fascinating.
created that, and he became a musician, a singer, famous photographer. In his late 70s, 80s, he was still producing things. He made millions learning computing, even though he'd never. I mean, he's died now. He's no longer here. But it's quite extraordinary what he created just because he did this process and connected into parts of himself that he didn't know. It's really interesting.
Amazing. And I love, this ability through time. I think I just get so tired of hearing this nonsense about age and learning and focus on particularly early generations and how discarded still people seem to be considered at certain time points. And it just shows you, the freshness of the mind at any age, just with the approach.
Yeah, I mean his whole. I mean he ended up in lots of top galleries. I think in America. I think he's American. And he he just made it up because he tuned into, connected with that genius artist self from a different time and space.
Wow, I love this.
Crazy.
I love this.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway. just thought, as you mentioned, the matrix, that's exactly how he describes it. Not
Really?
the matrix, but that plugging in, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
Wow, this is exciting. So you've got some light coming through now. You look like you're in a witness
Yes.
protection program, Catherine.
Yeah.
That's not your real name, by the way.
Well, I've been fire guarding. I've got I don't know if you can see which way is it?
Oh wow.
I've had to get the fire going because it's the only source of heat, and it's it's quite cold in the mornings, and it may be beautiful. It doesn't look like it's going to be sunny today, but yes, I had to get that fire right.
The UK is copying your time zone at the moment. Most people have got the heating on in June here. It's been absolutely freezing.
No, it's horrible.
That's crazy, isn't it?
14 degrees, it's 16 degrees it says it is at the moment.
Wow.
Clearly the longest day of the year.
Yes. Yes, that's right. You're coming up to the 21st. Yeah, it's really, we've had the most, it's been beautiful. And for winter, it's been incredible. In the daytime, it's been really stunning, lovely. But I really do appreciate you creating this. I'm sorry I didn't come last time. But I really, when I read that Babylon book, I really, really disliked it so much. I thought I just don't want to read it again.
Oh wow,
But Liz said,
let's
you
hear
should,
that.
you should read it again and, you know, see it from different eyes, because I think there was a lot of resistance. It was pre-Anne. We should have a BA before Anne, and AA after Anne. So it'd be really interesting to read Anne's book again. And it's really interesting listening to your reflections on this book, because I haven't read it again since 10 years ago, whatever and my approach and my mental belief system was very, very different then. And it's quite interesting seeing the shift.
Wow, it's fascinating. What do you have anything
He's radically.
do you have anything you'd like to share about the richest man in Babylon?
No.
No, just the difference. Yeah, it's very interesting. I could see.
Yeah.
I can see, I could see that it could be hard to read in terms of resistance and where it's coming from. Absolutely, but like you say, there's something about and soften things somehow. This ability again, the shape shifting, bending things. It allows things to come through, I think.
Yeah. And I think, you know, looking through the filter of Tim's approach to time and Anne's good enough,
Yes.
that's a really, that's a dramatic shift. This is good enough. I don't need to perfect it. I don't need to do this PowerPoint until it's got sparkles on. I can just leave it now. It's a library talk. Move on, Catherine.
How much money is it making you as well, Catherine? I mean, Tim talks about enough. I've underlined it many times in here. So again, we hear the echoes of Anne's work in Tim's work. He relates the enoughness, I think, in terms of information, particularly. But I think it's so refreshing, you know, what he says about that. I thought it was great how most inputs are useless and time is wasted in proportion to the amount that's available. This kind of physics kind of formula for things. And also there was something that I came across that I thought he very, very clearly spoke about. If you can't allow yourself to not take in information, then you're never going to be able to create any output yourself. Just trying to find the quote. He was so clear.
If you don't allow yourself to take any in.
Well, basically, he almost kind of described it as a formula that the more information you take in, the less you're actually going to create an output yourself. So if you want to create output, and for me, I don't hear that as a kind of factory productivity, Amazonian crack the whip kind of productivity. But in terms of a capacity to be creative, that's how I hear a lot of this productivity kind of language. He's basically saying, if you're constantly taking all this data in all the time from all the sources and all the platforms at all the speed, then that really plugs you up and bungs you up for how much you can create yourself. And I think his whole discussion around attention and information and low information diet, cultivating selective ignorance, all of these things, how essential that is to us being able to create anything. I thought that was very beautiful. That was a kind of like a silence, the importance of silence, importance of quiet, whatever form that silence may take, whether that's, not allowing yourself to read these things. I mean, the way you spoke about not reading the news or letting any news come in and him still knowing it. And this is not negativity of news or anything, but just he didn't need to do that because he'd be aware of the things that he'd need to know. I thought he had a very good way of understanding the proportionality of those things.
Yeah. I was listening to another teacher just recently, this last week, reminding and encouraging us to daydream. But the instruction was not to direct the daydream, but to receive the daydream. And so I have been actively, sounds crazy, doing my best not to direct my daydream. And I've had some quite extraordinary synchronicities and experiences by not pushing that energy. It's really, really interesting. And can we, yeah,
Is that a kind of
not getting
meditation?
that hooked? Sorry, go on.
Is that like a kind of meditation? Because if you're allowing your mind to daydream, you're not directing, you're just letting it free flow.
Exactly. But I tend to do it when I'm moving. But it just being really vigilant with my thinking, and not going down the rabbit holes of the unhelpful what ifs, but just being curious and just staying open, but actively, especially when I go on, there's a lovely little walk around here, and just actively opening my mind and trying to step back into that childlike innocence of, oh look, that leaf is a bit more golden than the others, or oh, this is a nice crunchy sound under my feet. So there is, I think there is some mindfulness in there, pure awareness, but just not pushing a particular thought to solve a problem. I'm doing my best to unwind that, because I am a solution seeker. I just get it right, then everything will be all right.
I think we've
work it out.
Culturally forgotten our ability to receive. That I think in a lot of indigenous cultures are very connected with that capacity. Particularly with dreaming, visioning, spirit kind of connections. And I think with something like the Tim Ferriss world and how it's applied to corporate things, there's this, again, you've got to switch off the mind from pushing, when we're extremely, as humans, able to just receive, just listen, be quiet, all that's held in that.
Great moment of quiet.
Yeah, Catherine's fallen off the connection.
I think it was gold. It was about to be gold.
It was gold. You can catch up with it on the recording. But it's just about losing our connection. So we need to keep tapping in.
That's hilarious that I lost my connection.
She lost the connection. Yeah. All right. We actually better go, but so appreciate this and both of you. And
it's really lovely. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you being here. I love doing this with you all and enjoying it.
Oh, Catherine. Yeah, sorry.
It's I've never done this before and discussed a book and had and this kind of back and forth conversation about perspective and what it means for people. So I'm really, yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah.
I haven't done it either, just making up as we go along.
Well, you sound an absolute pro, Sarah. I've really, really enjoyed listening to your reflections. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, and enjoy where you are, and we'll see you next time. So, Anne Wilson, the Welsh chef, and that concludes
All right.
that.
Bong.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Go well.
Thanks.
Bye bye. Lots of love. Bye bye.
Bye bye.